You fired her for protecting an elderly man. What a disgrace. Emma, a kind-hearted waitress, stood up to a group of teen bullies harassing an elderly biker. Her act of courage cost her job, but she refused to back down. Just 2 hours later, the ground rumbled as 500 bikers arrived, changing Emma's life forever. This is her story. Emma Thompson was a 42-year-old waitress at Johnny's Diner, one of the oldest restaurants in their small town. Unlike many people her age who had moved on to different careers, Emma had worked at the diner for nearly 20 years because she genuinely loved taking care of people. The regular customers weren't just customers to her. They were family. Life hadn't always been easy for Emma. She'd been a single mom since her husband passed away 12 years ago, raising her daughter Sarah on her own while working double shifts at the diner. Even though people often told her she could find better paying work, Emma knew that money wasn't everything. Johnny's Diner had been there for her when she needed it most, and she stayed loyal to the place that had become her second home. Johnny's Diner wasn't just any restaurant. It was the heart of their small town. The red and chrome building had stood on the corner of Main Street for over 50 years, and more than half the town's residents were regular customers. Emma had started working there when old Mr. Johnny still owned it, and he had treated her like a daughter, even helping her out with extra shifts when she struggled to pay Sarah's college tuition. The diner was especially popular because of Emma. Not only was she an excellent waitress, but she had a way of making everyone feel special. She knew that Mr. Peterson, who'd been coming in every morning at 6:00 a.m. for 15 years, liked his coffee with 2 sugars and his toast extra crispy. She remembered that Mrs. Johnson, a retired teacher who taught Emma's daughter in 3rd grade, was allergic to nuts. After 20 years of serving the community, Emma could tell you the story behind every regular customer who walked through those doors. 3 months ago, everything changed when old Mr. Johnny retired and his son Richard took over. Unlike his father, who valued community, Richard only cared about profits. He started making changes immediately, raising prices, changing the classic menu, and pushing for a more upscale atmosphere. The regular customers who had been coming for years started feeling unwelcome, and Emma watched helplessly as the diner's warm, familiar atmosphere began to fade. One rainy afternoon in October, Emma was working her usual shift when she noticed an elderly man pull up on an old Harley-Davidson. She recognized him as Frank Morrison, a 75-year-old regular who'd been coming to the diner every Tuesday for coffee and apple pie longer than Emma had worked there. His leather jacket was weathered and his beard was gray, but he always had a kind word for everyone. Frank had been coming to Johnny's Diner since it opened. He was more than just a customer. He was part of the diner's history. The wall behind his usual booth even had an old photograph of him and Mr. Johnny from 1968, both looking young and proud next to their motorcycles. During Emma's early days at the diner, Frank had been one of the first customers to welcome her, telling her stories about the town's history while she refilled his coffee cup. As Frank made his way to his usual booth, a group of teenagers from the expensive private school nearby started making loud comments. They were the kind of customers Richard had been trying to attract lately, always flashing their parents' credit cards and treating the staff like servants. "Look at that old guy," one of them sneered. "Probably thinks he's still some tough biker. Should have left the motorcycle at the retirement home." Another laughed. "Bet he can't even remember where he parked it." A third one added, causing the whole group to burst into cruel laughter. Emma saw Frank's shoulders slump slightly as he walked past their table. She knew he could hear them. Everyone could, but he said nothing, just kept walking with quiet dignity. Frank had been through too much in his life to let a bunch of teenagers bother him, but Emma could see the hurt in his eyes. The teens grew bolder, and one of them stuck out his foot as Frank passed. Emma moved quickly, steadying Frank before he could trip. That's when she'd had enough. 20 years of watching the diner change, combined with seeing these kids disrespect someone like Frank, made something snap inside her. "That's it," she said firmly, turning to face the teenagers. "Pack up your things and leave. We don't serve bullies here." The teens looked shocked. Nobody had ever stood up to them before. "Do you know who my father is?" one of them demanded, pulling out his phone. "He's on the city council." "I don't care if your father is the president," Emma replied, her voice steady and firm. "You don't treat people like that in here. Not in Johnny's Diner, not ever." The commotion brought Richard running from his office. When the teens told him what happened, his face turned red with anger. "Emma, you can't throw out paying customers," he snapped. "Apologize to them immediately." Emma stood her ground, just as she had stood her ground through all of life's challenges. "No, sir. They were trying to trip an elderly man. That's dangerous and cruel." "Then you're fired," Richard said coldly. "Get your things and get out." Frank tried to intervene, but Richard wouldn't listen. Emma took off her apron, gave Frank a gentle smile, and walked out with her head held high, just like she'd taught her daughter to do when facing injustice. What Richard didn't know was that Frank Morrison wasn't just any old biker. In the 1960s, he had founded the Iron Veterans Motorcycle Club, which had grown to become the largest motorcycle club in the state. Over the decades, they had become known for their charity work and community service, raising millions of dollars for local causes. In fact, they had helped Emma years ago when she needed money for her husband's medical bills, though she never knew it was them. As soon as Emma left, Frank pulled out his phone. Within minutes, the story of what had happened was spreading through every motorcycle club in the city. Other customers in the diner were also texting and calling friends, sharing how Richard had fired Emma for standing up to bullies. 2 hours later, the ground began to rumble. The sound of motorcycles filled the air as bikes started arriving, not just the Iron Veterans, but every club in the state. Old bikes, new bikes, riders young and old, until the entire street was filled with over 500 motorcycles. Frank Morrison led the group into the diner, now packed with leather-clad bikers. Richard Blake stood frozen behind the counter as Frank explained loudly what had happened to Emma. "This diner used to stand for something," Frank said, his voice carrying through the silent restaurant. Old Johnny understood that. He knew it wasn't about how much money people had, it was about respect. One of the bikers stepped forward, a tall woman in her 50s wearing a leather vest covered in patches. "I'm Susan Martinez, president of the Iron Veterans," she announced. "We've been coming here for 40 years. Every charity run, every toy drive, every fundraiser. This was our home base until today." She turned to Richard. "We've already called your father. He's agreed to sell us the diner. The paperwork is being drawn up right now." Richard's face went pale. "You can't do that," he protested. "It's already done," Susan smiled. "And our first act as owners is making Emma the new manager." The story spread quickly through social media. Local news picked it up, celebrating how the bikers had stood up against bullying. The Iron Veterans' reputation for community service grew even stronger. Today, Johnny's Diner still stands on that corner, now owned by the Iron Veterans Motorcycle Club. Emma runs the place with the same love and care she showed as a waitress. And every Tuesday, you'll find Frank at his usual booth, enjoying coffee and apple pie. The teenagers who caused all the trouble. They came back a week later to apologize, not just to Frank, but to Emma too. Turns out, seeing 500 bikers stand up for what's right taught them more about respect than any lecture could. As for Richard, he tried opening an upscale restaurant across town, but it never succeeded. Like Johnny's Diner, people say he learned too late that success isn't about fancy menus or high prices. It's about treating people with dignity and respect. The diner now has a new sign above the door. "Everyone's welcome, as long as you bring respect." And below it, there's always a row of motorcycles parked outside, rain or shine, reminding everyone that sometimes the toughest-looking people have the biggest hearts. Emma's daughter, Sarah, now graduated from college, often helps out at the diner on weekends. She tells everyone who'll listen how her mom taught her the most important lesson in life. That standing up for what's right might cost you something in the moment, but kindness and courage always find their way back to you. The true measure of success isn't in how much money you make, but in how you treat others. Sometimes, standing up for what's right might seem costly at first, but kindness has a way of coming back to you when you least expect it. Just ask Emma. She'll tell you over a cup of coffee and a slice of apple pie, served with the same smile that's been warming hearts at Johnny's Diner for 20 years. Loved this story? Hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more. Don't forget to check out the video currently on your screen. You won't want to miss it. See you next time.